Nobody inside the Indiana Fever organization expected things to spiral this fast. What started as frustration online suddenly exploded into complete chaos just 2 minutes after a leaked courtside video began spreading across social media like wildfire. Fans weren't just criticizing Stephanie White anymore. They were declaring war on her. Thousands of furious Caitlin Clark supporters flooded comment sections, bombarded Fever accounts, and turned every post into a battlefield of rage, accusations, and betrayal. But the moment that changed everything came when cameras caught Stephanie White leaving practice visibly shaken, wiping tears from her face as security escorted her through a crowd of screaming fans outside the arena. And now the entire WNBA world is asking the same terrifying question. Did the Fever completely lose control of the biggest superstar in women's basketball? Because behind the scenes, insiders are now revealing that tensions between Clark's camp and the coaching staff have been boiling for weeks. Players are reportedly divided. Front office executives are panicking. Sponsors are allegedly demanding answers. And some fans are even threatening to boycott games until Stephanie White is gone for good. But what truly pushed this situation over the edge wasn't just one bad game. It was a shocking accusation that sent Caitlin Clark fans into a nuclear meltdown. An accusation so explosive that league officials reportedly began monitoring the backlash in real time as the situation turned uglier by the minute. And according to people inside the arena that night, the worst part hadn't even happened yet. The pressure surrounding Caitlin Clark was already unlike anything the WNBA had ever experienced long before she stepped onto an Indiana Fever court. From the moment she shattered scoring records at Caitlin Clark's Iowa games, women's basketball stopped feeling like a niche sport and started feeling like a national event. Every arena sold out. Every broadcast exploded in ratings. Celebrities sat courtside. Sports networks that barely mentioned the WNBA suddenly built entire segments around her every move. To millions of fans, Caitlin Clark wasn't just a rookie entering the league. She was the future of the sport itself. And that created a dangerous level of expectation. The Indiana Fever organization knew exactly what they had in their hands. Ticket prices skyrocketed almost overnight. Jerseys vanished from stores within hours. Road arenas moved games into bigger venues just to handle the crowds Clark attracted. The Fever were no longer just rebuilding. They had become the center of the entire basketball universe. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming. Sources close to the organization claimed there were early disagreements about how the team should operate around Clark. Some believed the offense needed to revolve entirely around her generational shooting and playmaking. Others inside the building reportedly pushed for a slower, more balanced system that wouldn't rely on one player controlling everything. That philosophical divide quietly turned into tension before the season even fully began. Then Stephanie White entered the picture. At first, many fans were optimistic. White had experience. She had respect around the league. Analysts praised her basketball IQ and leadership style. But things started changing the moment preseason clips and media coverage began surfacing online. Fans noticed something that instantly rubbed them the wrong way. The Fever social media team seemed to spotlight Stephanie White constantly. Mic'd up practice videos, exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes coaching features, emotional speeches, endless promotional clips focused on White's leadership vision. Meanwhile, fans felt like Caitlin Clark herself was slowly disappearing into the background. At first, the criticism stayed relatively small. But then the games started. And suddenly the internet exploded. Fans began obsessively breaking down every possession Clark played. Every time she stood off ball, social media erupted. Every missed pass became proof she was being iced out. Every slow offensive possession fueled conspiracy theories that the coaching staff was intentionally limiting her style to force her into a system she never wanted. The outrage became deeply personal. Many Caitlin Clark fans already believed the media, former players, and even parts of the league resented how quickly Clark became the face of women's basketball. So when they saw moments where Clark wasn't dominating the offense, it immediately triggered a larger narrative in their minds. They weren't just watching basketball anymore. They believed they were watching politics, jealousy, and power struggles unfold in real time. And that's when emotions inside the fan base became explosive. Some Fever supporters defended Stephanie White, arguing that building a championship team required balance and discipline. But Clark's most passionate supporters saw things very differently. To them, every attempt to balance the offense felt like sabotage. They believed the Fever were trying to control the very player who had saved their franchise from irrelevance. Then came the comments that poured gasoline on the fire. Former players, podcasters, and viral sports influencers began openly questioning whether the Fever truly understood what they had. Clips criticizing Stephanie White started gaining millions of views. TikTok edits painted Clark as a superstar trapped inside the wrong system. YouTube channels began framing the situation as a full-scale internal war. And with every passing day, the pressure surrounding Stephanie White became more vicious, more emotional, and far more dangerous. Because by the time the Fever realized this wasn't normal fan criticism anymore, the anger had already transformed into something the organization could no longer control. The situation inside the Indiana Fever organization shifted dramatically the moment the first internal disagreement became public. What had once been fan speculation suddenly turned into a full-blown controversy when leaked footage and insider claims suggested that Caitlin Clark's role in the offense was being deliberately limited during key stretches of games. At the center of the storm was Caitlin Clark, the most talked-about rookie in modern women's basketball history. Fans expected her to immediately become the uncontested engine of the offense. Instead, what they saw was something far more complicated. Possessions where she stood off ball, sets where the offense ran through other guards, and moments where she was visibly frustrated after long stretches without touching the ball. For many viewers, that was the breaking point. Online communities erupted almost instantly. Every possession was dissected frame by frame. Every coaching decision was questioned, and every stretch where Clark wasn't featured became evidence of something deeper happening behind the scenes. The narrative formed quickly and aggressively. The Fever were not building around their generational superstar. They were controlling her. And that's when the first major shockwave hit. A leaked post-game clip surfaced, showing Clark visibly frustrated on the bench during a timeout, shaking her head while coaches discussed adjustments. The clip spread within minutes. But what made it explode wasn't just the footage, it was what fans believed it represented. To them, it looked like a superstar being ignored in real time. Then came the moment that completely changed the tone of the entire situation. A private conversation, allegedly between staff members, was partially overheard and later circulated online. While never officially confirmed, the content was enough to ignite chaos. The implication was simple but explosive. The Fever coaching staff believed they needed to slow down Clark's dominance in order to build a more structured system. That single idea detonated across social media. Fans interpreted it as betrayal. Within hours, hashtags targeting Stephanie White began trending. Clips of her interviews were re-uploaded with angry captions. Every tactical explanation she gave was now being reframed as justification for holding Clark back. Even neutral basketball analysis turned into ammunition for outrage. Inside the organization, the tension reportedly escalated fast. Players were allegedly divided into quiet factions, some supporting the structured system, others believing Clark should be fully unleashed as the primary offensive force. Coaches were said to be under increasing pressure from both fans and internal voices. And executives, watching ticket sales and media attention skyrocket, were caught between protecting long-term strategy and responding to immediate public anger. But the real shock came during a nationally televised game. Midway through the third quarter, Clark was subbed out during a critical offensive run. The crowd reaction inside the arena was immediate and loud. Cameras caught fans visibly frustrated, some even booing the decision. Commentators attempted to justify the rotation, but social media was already convinced something deeper was happening. That moment became the turning point, because it wasn't just about one substitution anymore. It became symbolic. For Clark supporters, it looked like confirmation that the coaching staff didn't trust her to control the game. For others, it was a standard coaching decision. But perception had already taken over reality. And once perception solidifies in sports culture, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. Then came the second shock. A post-game interview with Caitlin Clark showed her carefully choosing words when asked about offensive rhythm and ball movement. Her tone was calm, but fans immediately began reading between the lines. Was she frustrated? Was she being restricted? Was she silently pushing back against the system? Every word became fuel. And just when the situation seemed like it couldn't escalate further, reports began circulating that tensions inside the locker room were no longer just strategic disagreements. They were becoming personal. That was the moment everything shifted from controversy into something far more unstable. By this point, the Indiana Fever situation had already stopped being normal basketball drama. It had evolved into something much more volatile, an emotional ecosystem where every decision, every quote, and every substitution was being interpreted as either loyalty or betrayal. And then came the second major twist that pushed everything into full-scale chaos. A series of anonymous insider posts began circulating online claiming that internal conversations inside the Fever locker room were becoming increasingly tense after games. According to these claims, the disagreement was no longer just about offensive structure. It had reportedly turned into a deeper divide over identity, what the team was supposed to be, and who it was supposed to revolve around. At the center of it all remained Caitlin Clark. Fans had already built a narrative that Clark was being restrained. But now, the story was mutating. It wasn't just that she wasn't being maximized, it was that different voices inside the organization allegedly wanted to redefine her role entirely. Some wanted her as a primary scorer, others as a playmaking decoy, and others reportedly wanted a system where no single player dominated possession at all. That idea alone set off another wave of outrage. Social media didn't just react, it detonated. Clips from games where Clark deferred possessions were now being labeled as evidence of suppression. Slow-motion breakdowns of offensive sets were analyzed like crime scenes. Even harmless coaching interactions on the sideline were being reframed as emotional power struggles. And then the second shockwave hit harder than the first. A widely shared video clip surfaced, showing Clark visibly animated during a sideline discussion with coaching staff. While no audio confirmed the context, fans immediately interpreted her body language as frustration. The clip spread faster than any previous moment in the controversy. Millions of views within hours. Thousands of reaction videos. Endless debate threads. But what made this moment different was not just the footage, it was the reaction inside the arena. For the first time, crowd energy noticeably shifted during a Fever home game. Every time Clark touched the ball, the arena responded louder. Every time she was taken out, murmurs of frustration spread through the stands. The audience itself had become part of the conflict. And that's when the organization's biggest fear quietly began to materialize. The franchise was no longer controlling the narrative. The fans were. Inside the Fever front office, panic reportedly started building. Ticket demand remained high, but sentiment was becoming unpredictable. Sponsors were said to be monitoring online backlash closely. Analysts began questioning whether the team could sustain the emotional volatility surrounding its biggest star. Meanwhile, inside the locker room, the tension allegedly deepened. Players were said to be increasingly aware of the outside noise. Every missed shot or broken play involving Clark became magnified online within minutes. Teammates who passed her the ball were praised. Teammates who didn't were criticized. That kind of external pressure reportedly began affecting internal chemistry. Coaches, especially Stephanie White, were now at the center of the storm. Every interview she gave was dissected. Every tactical explanation was interpreted as justification. Every attempt to emphasize team structure was framed by critics as resistance to Clark's dominance. And then came the moment that escalated everything again. A post-game press conference clip showed White carefully addressing questions about offensive rhythm and player roles. While her answers were standard coach speak, social media erupted instantly. Fans accused her of being dismissive. Others claimed she was avoiding accountability. And within hours, the narrative had already hardened into something far more aggressive. This wasn't just disagreement anymore. It was polarization. Half the fan base believed the system was necessary. The other half believed it was sabotaging a generational talent in real time. And the more the organization tried to stabilize things with controlled messaging and media appearances, the worse the backlash became. Because at this stage, it wasn't about basketball anymore. It was about belief systems. And once fans lock into belief systems, every possession becomes proof, and every silence becomes suspicion. And right as the Fever tried to regain control of the narrative, a new wave of insider claims surfaced, suggesting that the emotional tension behind the scenes was far more serious than anyone publicly admitted. By the time the controversy reached this stage, the Indiana Fever were no longer dealing with normal criticism. They were dealing with a full-scale emotional collapse in public perception. Every game, every interview, and every social media post was now feeding into a growing storm that refused to settle. At the center of the entire situation was still Caitlin Clark, whose presence had transformed the Fever into the most-watched storyline in women's basketball. But instead of that attention being purely celebratory, it had now become deeply divided. One half of the audience saw a superstar being elevated into greatness. The other half believed she was being constrained by the very system meant to unlock her potential. And that division was becoming louder by the day. Online platforms turned into battlegrounds. Every highlight clip became a debate. Every missed shot turned into a narrative. Fans weren't just watching basketball anymore. They were analyzing intent. Was Clark being prioritized? Was she being limited? Was the system built for her or against her? The emotional intensity reached a point where even neutral basketball discussions began to collapse under pressure. Comment sections under Fever highlights became flooded with arguments, accusations, and long threads breaking down offensive sets in extreme detail. Influencers and sports commentators began reacting not just to games, but to the reaction itself. The story had become self-sustaining. Inside arenas, the energy also began to shift. Crowds grew louder whenever Clark touched the ball, almost as if fans were trying to override coaching decisions through sheer emotional pressure. Every substitution involving her was now met with visible reactions, cheers, boos, or stunned silence, depending on the moment. And that emotional volatility began to affect everyone involved. Coaches found themselves under constant scrutiny. Every adjustment was second-guessed in real time. Every timeout was analyzed like a critical turning point. Even basic rotation decisions were framed as statements about power, trust, and control. Stephanie White, in particular, became the focal point of the backlash. Her calm explanations in interviews were no longer interpreted as strategy. They were interpreted as resistance. Fans believed they were watching a coach defend a system that didn't align with the team's most powerful asset. And as that belief spread, her public perception began to deteriorate rapidly. But the most intense pressure wasn't just coming from outside. Inside the Fever ecosystem, tensions reportedly became harder to ignore. Players were said to be increasingly aware of how every action would be interpreted online. A missed pass involving Clark could trend within minutes. A defensive rotation could be turned into a viral clip. The emotional weight of constant scrutiny began to seep into performance itself. Executives were now forced into crisis monitoring mode. Ticket sales remained strong, but sentiment was unstable. Media coverage was relentless. Every outlet had a different interpretation of the same reality. Some framed the situation as growing pains around a young superstar. Others framed it as a structural conflict between coaching philosophy and generational talent. And then came the moment that pushed everything even further. A post-game interaction clip showed Clark briefly acknowledging frustration after a tight game, her expression caught between exhaustion and intensity. The clip was short, but it spread instantly. Fans interpreted it in multiple ways. Some saw competitive fire, others saw frustration with the system. And just like that, the narrative shifted again. Because now it wasn't just about coaching decisions or offensive schemes. It was about emotional strain. The idea that a generational talent was not only being analyzed, but emotionally weighed down by the environment around her became the new dominant storyline online. And as the public fallout intensified, one question began echoing everywhere, from fans to analysts to insiders watching from the sidelines. How long before something inside the organization finally breaks completely? At this point, The situation inside the Indiana Fever organization had crossed every boundary of normal sports controversy. What began as fan frustration had evolved into a full emotional and structural crisis that now threatened to define the entire season. And then came the final twist that changed everything again. A new wave of insider claims began circulating online, suggesting that internal meetings inside the Fever organization had become significantly more intense behind closed doors. According to multiple unverified reports, conversations were no longer just about strategy or rotations. They were now about control, direction, and the long-term identity of the franchise itself. At the center of it all remained Caitlin Clark, whose impact on the league had already transformed attendance, ratings, and global attention toward women's basketball. But now, instead of being just a rising superstar, she had become the emotional core of a much larger organizational conflict. Fans believed the situation had reached a breaking point. Social media erupted again when alleged internal discussions were summarized in viral posts claiming that different voices within the organization were pushing for completely opposite visions of the team. One vision reportedly centered entirely around unlocking Clark's offensive dominance. The other reportedly focused on maintaining a structured, balanced system that did not rely on one player controlling every possession. And the problem wasn't just disagreement. It was the intensity of the divide. Because now, every decision was being interpreted as a power struggle. Every lineup adjustment became a statement. Every timeout became a signal. Every interview became ammunition. Then came the moment that pushed emotions to their absolute limit. A post-game scene, captured by fans outside the arena, showed Stephanie White leaving the facility under heavy emotional pressure. Her expression was tense, her pace rushed, and security reportedly escorted her through a growing crowd of shouting supporters. While nothing officially confirmed what she was feeling, the footage was enough to ignite a new wave of speculation across the internet. Within minutes, clips were circulating everywhere. Some claimed she was overwhelmed by the backlash. Others insisted it was just standard post-game fatigue. But the narrative had already escaped control. To millions of viewers, it symbolized something much bigger than a single coach leaving a building. It symbolized a franchise under siege. And inside the organization, things were reportedly no calmer. Sources suggested that communication between key decision-makers had become increasingly strained. Every attempt to stabilize messaging was met with more external backlash. Every attempt to reinforce structure was interpreted as resistance to fan pressure. The gap between internal strategy and public perception had widened into something nearly impossible to bridge. Meanwhile, the pressure on the players continued to rise. Every possession involving Clark was now magnified to an extreme level. Every coaching decision was second-guessed instantly. The emotional weight of expectation, criticism, and constant scrutiny was becoming a force that no one inside the organization could fully escape. And then came the final chilling development. A viral post claimed that internal discussions had reached a stage where the future direction of the team might need urgent reevaluation if the situation continued to escalate at this pace. While nothing was confirmed, the idea alone sent shockwaves through the fan base. Because now, this wasn't just about frustration. It wasn't just about coaching. It wasn't even just about basketball anymore. It had become a question of survival, for a system, for a coaching philosophy, and for the balance between superstar power and organizational control. And as the clip of Stephanie White continued circulating, and as fan outrage showed no signs of slowing down, one final question began dominating every corner of the conversation. If this tension continues to grow, what happens when something inside the Fever finally snaps for real? At this point, this story is no longer just about one coach, one player, or one franchise. It has become a full-scale emotional storm that is dividing fans, analysts, and even casual viewers of women's basketball. Every new clip, every new post, and every new rumor is adding more fuel to a fire that already feels impossible to control. And the biggest question now is simple, but dangerous. Where does this go next? Because if the tension inside the Indiana Fever organization continues to rise at this pace, the consequences won't stay behind closed doors anymore. They will spill onto the court, into the locker room, and into the future of one of the most talked about teams in the league. Fans are already taking sides. The internet is already split, and every game from this point forward is going to be watched under a microscope. So the real question is, are we watching a growing superstar era being built around Caitlin Clark, or are we watching the beginning of a breakdown that changes everything? Because one thing is clear, this story is far from over. And the next move from the Fever organization could either calm the storm or make it explode even further.